Yeah, I want to dedicate this year to Aliyas Neshama of Yaakov, Avish ben Yaakov, that the Neshama should have Aliyah in the schus of the Ramchal, and I want to thank Avi Shombrun for sponsoring the students, so on and so forth. And b'schus that, the Neshama should have a tremendous Aliyah. You know, to get together with Ramchal. Maybe they are. Who knows? You know, because he has a chelik in the Torah's Ramchal. Tonight is the Yortzait of Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Sato. It's very interesting. When he was nifta Yisoid Shabi Yisoid, which is tonight. And Taka the Ramchal spent his whole life in Yisoid Shabi Yisoid. That it's not just in Yisoid, but it's Yisoid of the Yisoid, which is a double layer of tremendous amount of Pnimius, which is really the foundation of the entire Torah. Ramchal himself was a very interesting person. He's very interesting for many reasons. Most people, you know, there are people who are Kabbalah, they learn Kabbalah, and they can achieve great heights in Kabbalah and so on. But there are certain people that are not just Mekubalim, they are really part of the transmission process. Does everybody hear me? Everybody hears me?
Yes.
They are part of the transmission process itself, which is interesting. And those type of Gedolim are different than just a Gadol, who's a Gadol in Torah and so on, you know. Obviously Kabbalah started long before. Torah is really a chelik from Torah Sheba'al Peh, was given to Moshe Rabbeinu and passed down through the generations. And of course the one who really is made the first mark is Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, the Rashbi, who wrote the Zohar. And it's just very interesting that even the Rashbi himself, you know, after the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died, was Nifta, so Rabbi Akiva took 5 or 6 Talmidim, and the whole Torah is really from these Talmidim. Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, Reb Nehemiah. Who's the other one? No. Reb Shimon. Yeah. And it says all the Torah of these people are really from Rabbi Akiva. So could you imagine what Rabbi Akiva knew? It's awesome to think about that they're all really part of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. But in any case, so the Rashbi wrote the Zohar, and then it was concealed, went on the ground, so to speak. And then it came up about 1,000 years later to different people, of course, until you had the Ari. The Ari really is one who brought out the whole Torah of the Zohar. And he certainly was part of the transmission process, the Ari himself, and so on. And then, of course, his Talmud, Reb Chaim Vital, who wrote down really what the Ari said in Kabbalah, because Ari hardly wrote anything. And of course, after Reb Chaim Vital, then you had other Mekubalim. It's interesting, there are many Mekubalim that the Olam doesn't really realize that they're Mekubalim. One of the greatest Mekubalim is the Pnei Yeshua. Go figure. Pnei Yeshua is, it was a Gadol Ador, the Pnei Yeshua, but he was a tremendous Mekubal, the Pnei Yeshua and so on. Yet Tosfos Yontef, even the Marshal, a lot of them were very great Mekubalim, although we don't know them in those terms. We know them as Litvisha. You know, they wrote on Shiprushma Gemara, but Kabbalah. But anyway, I can go on, but I want to get to this year. But the main idea is that after the Ari, you had certain what's called expositors of the Ari, who brought down the Ari and was Mefarsim and so on. Among them, of course, was the Rishash and the Ramchal, and each one of them was Megal, a tremendous amount of ideas of the Ari. But it's interesting, the one who's Megal, the Nimshal of the Ari, because Kabbalah is really terminology is really a mashal, it's metaphor, and the one who's really Megal, the Nimshal, which means if you decode the metaphor of the Kabbalah, then you really understand what it's saying, was the Ramchal. And of course he was tremendously great in that. And I just tell you one thing what the Vilna Gaon said of the Ramchal, which is astounding, besides the other things that people know. But the nephew of Reb Chaim Volozhin, who we know is the greatest Talmud of Vilna Gaon. So the nephew wrote that he just finished, he wrote to his uncle, Reb Chaim Volozhin. He brings it down, Reb Chaim Friedlander. But anyway, the letter, where he says to his uncle, Reb Chaim Volozhin, he said, I just got finished learning a sefer of the Ramchal on Kabbalah, the Adam Amorim. Anyway, so he said, it's tremendous. So he said, how come he wasn't zocheh to live more than 40 years? So Reb Chaim Volozhin answered him, he said, I'll tell you, I don't know. I mean, only the Rebbe Shem knows. But I'll tell you what my Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, said on the Ramchal. And this is the Eidus from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon said the following. He said, when I learned the Ari, the Vilna Gaon, he mastered Kabbalah. When he's 14 years old, he built a Golem. But in any case, he said when he learned the Reb Chaim Vital, he wasn't sure if Reb Chaim Vital understood the nimshal of the Ari, the real meaning of the terminology of Kabbalah. This is Reb Chaim Volozhin saying in the name of the Goin about Reb Chaim Vital, which is incredible. He's the one who wrote down everything we know about the Ari. But he says that after a while, he saw that Reb Chaim Vital does understand the nimshal of the Ari. Thank God. Then he continues, the Vilna Gaon, and says, the Ramchal borrow that he understands the nimshal of the Ari. I wasn't even his suffix. And then the Vilna Gaon ends that by saying, Baruch Hashem Gamani. I also understand the nimshal of the Ari. So you can see that what the Vilna Gaon held of the Ramchal, which is awesome, and so on. And many times, just one statement from the Ramchal, where the Ramchal says, which is astounding, in one of the letters that he writes, the Igros Ramchal, he writes a letter to his Rebbe, Reb Shai Basan, who was his Rebbe. And he writes to his Rebbe, Reb Shai Basan, that in one of the letters, he writes that, I don't even know half of what the Ari knew. Half. I don't know half of what he knew. You know what his half was? But I was commanded to write, and he wasn't. That's what he writes. So could you imagine him saying, I don't know half? That means maybe he knew 48%. Do you know what it is to know 48% of what the Ari knew? It's unbelievable. It just shows you the greatness of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He was many other things. A highly unusual person because he was called a Chocham HaKoilel. He wrote books on logic, method, how to learn Gemara. He wrote poetry. He wrote a second Zohar. Imagine that. He wrote a Tehillim. He wrote plays, Api Kabbalah. That's what he wrote, Ramchal. Plays, Api Kabbalah. He wrote a Pirush.
Can you elaborate what that means, the plays?
He knew what?
Can you elaborate what a play on Kabbalah?
No, I can't do it. I have to go into my shiur. It's not the place for that. Sorry. But, and he wrote plays, Api Kabbalah. We have that Migdalois, and so I show him Tehillah, there's certain plays. But what he, and he also wrote a 1,000-page commentary, Pirush, on Koheles. We don't have any of that stuff. A lot of it was lost because they were buried. They wanted to put him in cherem, so he agreed that they could take a lot of his form and put it into a chest, and it's buried somewhere in Frankfurt. So the next time you're in Frankfurt, maybe you could find it, because in that chest is unbelievable treasures. In any case, tonight is his Yortzait, and every year I make, and my brother also makes it, we made a Yortzait Suda Ramchal. This is the 33rd year that I'm making a Suda from his Yortzait, and it's really supposed to be able to do it and so on. In any case, so this is the idea of Ramchal. He died, Yisayt should be Yisayt, which I said was very appropriate for what he did in his life. Okay. I'd like to speak tonight about a very interesting topic, and that is, in many ways, what are the mechanics of the tikkun process itself? What goes on? How do we understand really what the process of tikkun is, what we're supposed to do, and how it comes out today? And also what I'd like to do is interpret, according to my understanding, the paraduma. You know, we learned today, it says in Mechokosei Telechu, that's Bahar Mechokosei, is today's Parsha. And Rashi says, of course, the famous Rashi, Imam Melim B'Torah, that if you're Omer B'Torah. And it's interesting, that Rashi has a tremendous genius. What does Amelis have to do with B'Chukosai? Which is interesting. And so on. But Rashi does say that. And so I'd like to dwell on that, to understand the concept of the Chok, Amelus, what the process really is, that really, what is it all about, what we do as Yiddishkeit. So I'd like to start off with a question, because it seems to be a contradiction. We know that in the second Rashi in Mishpatim, it says there that the Boshim says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Al tal al daitcha, don't think, okay, that you could teach them halacha, a perek, or whatever, and that they should know it and so on. Don't think that you should do that only. What you need to do is you need to teach that, right, with the understanding, its perush, its tam, its principle, its pirush, the details of that, like a shulchan aruch, like a set table in front of you. What is the Roshim saying? And this is clearly how the Roshim taught Moshe Rabbeinu. He taught Moshe Rabbeinu in an incredibly organized way, which means that he taught him every halacha. He taught him what I call the halacha, which is a case and a conduct. And then he taught him the principles, the tam. Why is this the din of that case or that situation? And then he taught him the pirush, which means the other tremendous amount of details of each halacha. And then what he did is he set it in front of him like a beautifully organized table. You ever walk into a catering hall where you have a table and everything is set and exactly, so each item is what's called separated from every other item. Everything is clear. It's really a structure. So he also taught Moshe Rabbeinu structurally. That's called Ferris, beauty. That's how he taught Moshe Rabbeinu. And he told them, when you teach the Jews, the Yidden, you need to teach the same way I'm teaching you. So if that's the case, why do you have to be humble? You know, if I have a teacher that teaches me so clear, why do I have to schwitz, labor, to understand something? I mean, he's going to put it right out in front of me. You know, it's like when you sit down to a table that's beautifully masuda, organized. So there seems to be a contradiction between the concept of Amelus and the concept of how the Bershom tells Moshe Rabbeinu to teach Klal Yisrael. Now, there are different ways of answering the question. The simpler answer is that, well, even if a teacher will teach you in an organized way, right, that doesn't mean you don't have to labor to work on trying to understand. Nobody could give you an understanding complete without your input of work. There's no such thing. Even if somebody's a very organized thinker, you still have to do it. You know, what's the hallmark of a good teacher, if you think about it? What does a teacher have to teach? What is the objective of education? That a teacher should teach or a student should learn? Which is it? The real thing is that students should learn. So the teacher has to accommodate himself to the student himself, which that's a whole theory of education, principles of education. So therefore, even if Moshe Rabbeinu could teach everybody, which I'm sure he did, beautifully in understanding, but the student still has to be omo, to understand what exactly am I seeing. He has to what's called assimilate the material into himself. The only way that can happen is when you hear it, you have to think about it, you have to analyze it, and so on. So that's a simple way of answering it. That awareness is always necessary, even if the material is presented in a beautiful manner. But the truth is, if you think about it, you could learn this at a much deeper level. Why we need amelus. How do we know we need amelus? Well, we have several chazals that tell us that we need to be omo. One of them was just spoken about in the siyum that we just had. What does it say? It says, Hem amelim, v'anachnu amelim. Hem amelim ve'enim mekabel schar, v'anachnu amelim and mekabel schar. What does that mean? That means they are not rewarded for the effort. If they know it, fine. If not, not. We, however, even if we don't really understand it in the end, we have a reward from the amelis itself. What a difference between us and them, and secular knowledge. That we are rewarded for amelis itself. And not only that, it says also, Yogata Matzosa. When can you find the understanding of halacha? Yogata. You need to do what? You need to be omel. You need to be yogea. You need to expend tremendous amount of effort. And then, if you do that, then you'll understand. So there you are. That's another concept of amelis that you see from Chazal. Then there's another concept of Chazal where it says, L'fum tsara agra. The reward of a person is based on the agra. Or I should say the tsar. The agra of a person, the reward of a person, is based on the tsar, on the effort. The pain of the effort, because effort always requires, I shouldn't use the word pain, but it's not simple. It requires a lot of, to a certain extent, intellectual suffering, if you want to use that expression. So we see from all Chazal, from Tsara Agra, Yogata Matzosa, Hema Melim, and so on, we see the concept of Amelis, and then we of course understand Rashi. The question is why? Why is Amelis treated in such a formidable fashion? Why? It should just say, you got to know your stuff, that's all. What's this Hadgosha? What is this emphasis on Amelis that we find in Chazal? That is the question I want to address tonight. What is the objective of the Bria? What does the Baruch Shem really want? Well, there's two fundamental things that we need to do as Jews. The first thing we need to do is to retransform the physical universe into a spiritual one. That's right. What we need to do is to create from an Olam Gashmi an Olam Ruchni. That's called Zikuch. The Ramchal calls that Zikuch. That's called the retransformation of a physical universe into a spiritual one. Literally, not figuratively. And this concept of Zikuch takes place after Mashiach is over. At the beginning of the 7,000, we know that the Mashiach is in the last Tekufa of the Olam Hazeh. So whenever he's going to come, let's hope it's this year. Okay. It ends in the year 6,000, which is the English year 2240. Because the Gemara says that the world will exist 6,000 years. Shisa alfei shnin havu alma. It'll exist 6,000 years. And as a result of that, it's over. Even the Mashiach's Tekufa ends. And then begins the concept of Zikuch, without getting into that. And so, Zikuch means retransformation, to purify the Geshem, and to change it into Ruchnis. Yeah, actually change it into a spiritual universe. This is what our job is. The question is why? What happens when there's a Zikuch? And the answer is a fundamental, it's probably the greatest fundamental idea. It's really what the whole Tachlis of the Bria is all about. It's called consciousness. In Kabbalah it's called Mochen, brains. What does that mean? The whole objective of the entire Avodah of 6,000 years is to raise our consciousness to be able to perceive reality completely different than what we perceive now. It's called Mochen, insight, to apprehend reality. And that's really in the end what we want to do. Ultimately, of course, there are different levels of understanding reality. There's the reality we understand now, which is really very poor. The reality which we will understand later on by Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic era. Then there's the reality after the Messianic era, the Yemos HaMashiach. There's the reality of pre-Olam Haba. And then there's the reality of Olam Haba. All of it involves one variable. And that variable is called, how much insight do you have in reality? How much merchen do you have? Therefore, one of the greatest impediments to consciousness, to the rise in consciousness, is Gashmi, is Geshem, is a physical world. Therefore, the physical world has to be removed. But not removed where all of a sudden we're taken off. It has to be retransformed. And as a result of that, our consciousness of reality is upgraded. In fact, you could see that by Yemos HaMashiach. It says what? Kimola oretz deya es Hashem. And the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, like the waters covers the seabed. What does that mean? What do you mean the knowledge of God? Because that's really the entire objective. What is the knowledge of God? Consciousness. It's to be aware of a much greater reality than we are aware now. Therefore, this is the relationship between zikuch, retransformation, and consciousness, awareness, merchen, of reality. That's what it is. Fine. What's the consciousness all about? What it really is what's called a continuum of one idea. What is reality, really? Well, real reality is Enod Mavadoi. In this reality, only the Rebbeinu Shalom exists, totally. And we are merely some type of we're a Nivra, but we don't exist like him. He truly is the only one that exists. Therefore, the consciousness that we need to have and upgrade ourselves, really, is the concept of Enod Mavadoi. The greater the consciousness, the greater the hasaga of Enod Mavadoi. Until finally, in Olam Haba, the hasaga of Enod Mavadoi is infinitely more than even the Malachim can masik. And the beauty of Olam Haba is that the hasaga, or the consciousness of Enod Mavadoi, grows every nanosecond, and it's infinite. So we can imagine what kind of how much consciousness we do not have, how much awareness we don't have. But in any case, that is the variable that changes. To what extent do we see reality, which is Enod Mavadoi? In any case, now let's take a look. We now understand the two ideas of the Bria. One is zikuch, and two is merchen, consciousness of Enod Mavadoi. That is the essence of the Bria. Before the Chet of Adam Harishon, what was his job? Well, the interesting thing about Adam Harishon before the Chet, he basically had two jobs. One, to avoid the advice of the Nachash, because the Nachash was trying to convince him and Chava that besides the Rebbeinu Shalom, there's another force. What is that force? The tree. And Rashi says that he said that the Rebbeinu Shalom ate from the tree, and that's how he became God. You want to become God, V'yisen Kelokim, you do the same thing. You eat from that tree. Because the tree is the real power source of everything, which of course was terrible sheker. In any case, but his job was to avoid that advice. And not only that, so what was his job? Just to avoid the advice? No. He also had a job is to pursue Ruchnius. How fast would he pursue Ruchnius? How fast would he pursue Kedusha and so on? That was all his job. And he only had about 6 hours to do it. Had he done that, Shabbos, he was born, and he was created on Erev Shabbos. Had he done that, he would have been Zeicha to a consciousness of which we cannot even imagine. We cannot even imagine his consciousness before the Chet. Al Achis Kama V'Kama, we cannot imagine what he would have understood or comprehended had he not done the Chet. However, he did the Chet, so therefore we are left with the concept or the stage of Adam Rishon after the Chet. I'm leaving out a lot of stuff, but in the interest of getting really continuance on. But in any case, this is what he did. So the question is, what was his objective after the Chet? And the answer to that was, big problem. Because what he introduced is a different reality that was not present before. He introduced a reality of a force that would try to tempt you to sin. It's called the Nachash, the snake. The snake, or the Nachash HaKadmoini, the primordial snake, was the mouthpiece of the Satan, trying to convince him desperately to be Choytei. At that point in time, Adam's world, which was, by the way, not our world, was much higher in Ruchnius. He was trying to convince Adam to eat from the tree and violate the command. Adam, of course, and Chava listened, and as a result of that, they introduced a terrible reality into the Bria. What was the tafkid of Adam HaRishon really? Well, he was born, or he created, I should say, in the sixth day. So he couldn't fool himself and say, I am, or I created everything. He knew he did nothing. So he knew of the concept, Yichud Shlitosoi, that the Rebbe Shem is an unbelievable force that can create an entire reality. He knew that. But he didn't know this, and the Rebbe Shem concealed it from him. And that was Yichud Mitziusoi, that the Rebbe Shem is the only one. So he left him with the mistake that he could make, the illusion, that there could be another reality called the tree. And that's what the Nachash tried to convince him. So therefore, his tafkid was the hasaga of Einod Milvadoi. Not just Einod in the sense of Kamoyu, that he's the most powerful force, but that is the only thing that really exists. It's called Yichud Mitziusai. Since he sinned, what did he express? He expressed that Yeshod Milvadoi. Besides me, God, there's something else called the tree. So what happened as a result is, since he believed in that, as a result of that, that reality of Yeshod Milvadoi happened. He created the reality of Yeshod Milvadoi. That illusion, he's going to have to break through that illusion. Who is the forerunner, the force behind that illusion? And the answer is the Satan. The Satan, all he wants to do is convince us that there are many, many things and forces besides God, besides the Rebbe Shem. That's what he's trying to do, because the ultimate tachlis is to believe in Einod Milvadoi. But he did worse than that. What he did is introduce a force that is constantly in the physical universe to tempt man to believe Yeshod Milvadoi. Some people even say Einod Milvadi. Besides me, there is nothing else. Those are the megalomaniacs and egomaniacs running around. However, he created this, the force. So now the problem became this. You created a reality with a whole different illusion. You created a reality illusion of Yeshod Milvadoi, that there are many beings and many forces besides the Rebbe Shem. What do? So obviously, you can no longer have a reality of Einod Milvadoi. Now you have a reality of Yeshod Milvadoi, and you need to destroy that. You need to destroy the whole concept of Yeshod Milvadoi. Besides the Rebbe Shem, is also me. You have to destroy that. Therefore, Adam now had to remove the whole concept of the Satan, who is responsible for creating the illusion of Yeshod Milvadoi. You should know, in the end, that's all it's about. It's all about, do we believe he's the boss, or rather he's the only one, or believe we exist independently of him? This idea of Einod Milvadoi, Yeshod Milvadoi, and so on, this is always stressed by the Ramchal in all his farm. This is the classic underpinning of all his farm, this idea of the Metzias of the Rebbe Shem. In any case, therefore, the tafkid of Adam now is to deal with what? Is to deal with the Satan, but to deal with the Zohama. The word Zohama is an influence of the Satan that he can project beyond his being. And it can pervade something else. So what the Satan did, since he created the reality, the Zohama pervaded the whole Olam Hazeh. Terrible. Everything became filled with that satanic influence. And the Satan has only one job. The Satan is a demolition expert. He destroys. That's what it's all about. Therefore, the Zohama that entered the physical universe destroys. There are many scientific laws that are based on this. The concept of destruction. You have the law of entropy. You have a lot of ideas that are really the Satan's influence on the entire Bria of destruction. And the greatest destruction is to fool you that Yeshod Milvadoi. because that's really what he's interested in. Therefore, Adam Rishon's job was to destroy this illusion, to destroy the Zoyamor. After that, then he could deal with the Kedusha itself. Then he could bring in a whole concept of Kedusha, after he would rid of the concept of the Zoyamor. Therefore, the Tachlis of the Bria became two things. Tahara, to remove the Sultan's influence, the Sultan and the Zoyamor, and Kedusha, to bring down tremendous amount of oil, and that is what's Moichen. That's consciousness. To reintroduce that in the Bria itself. This was the job of Adam Rishon. It's interesting, the Gematria of Zoyamor is really equivalent to Tumah. That's a very important idea. Zoyamor is 59 plus 1, 60. Tumah is 61 minus 1, 60. And you're allowed to play around like that with a Gematria. But in any case, what is that? That tells us a tremendous thing. What is Tumah? When you learn say the Taharas. What is Tumah? Tumah is really Zoyamor. It is surface Zoyamor. That's what Tumah really is. But in and of itself, Tumah is really Zoyamor. That's where it comes from. And that gives a great deal of understanding in many areas of Seder Taharas. In any case, that's what he did. But the question is, how do we do this? How do we remove the first stage, which is the stage, of course, of the removal of the Zoyamor, or the Sultan? And the answer to that is there are three tikkun devices. All essentially do one thing. What are the devices? There is mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin. Those are the three devices. When you do mitzvahs, you remove Zoyamor. When you do tshuva, you do tshuva on a chet, you remove Zoyamor. And when you suffer, you remove Zoyamor. Why? Because remember what I said. The Zoyamor is responsible for an illusion called Yeshod Mavadoy. That there are many forces, many beings in the world besides God. Therefore, each one of these three things removes it. How? Let's take a look. A mitzvah. What is a mitzvah really? Well, a mitzvah in a certain sense interferes with you and reality. It controls you, it regulates you. It says, hey, you can't eat this. You need to do something. It has to be kosher or whatever. It regulates 613 ways your actions, your activities. What is the conflict here? Well, the conflict is this. Imagine. Let's assume you're sleeping and it's 6 a.m. It's in the middle of winter. It snowed last night. Left a foot on the ground and you're wiped. And all of a sudden, your alarm clock rings and says you got to go to Minyan. There's a conflict here. What's the conflict? The conflict is, well, should I get up for Minyan, do that, or should I go back to sleep and daven at the Kessin, as they say? Okay, that's a battle of what? Of act. But really, the conflict is deeper. Should I get up for Minyan because it's his will, his rotzen, that I go get up for Minyan? Or instead, I should keep sleeping because I want to do my will, my rotzen. So it comes out that it's not a conflict of act so much, it's really a conflict of will. But it's really deeper than that. Should I get up for Minyan and do his will? Why? Because his will is the only thing that exists. My will is an illusion, really. Or no, I should sleep, do my will, because I exist independent of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Interesting. The conflict ultimately of doing a mitzvah is Einay Mevadoy or Yeshod Mevadoy. Therefore, that is a tikkun device of creating or removing the Sultan Yeshod Mevadoy into a world of Einay Mevadoy. You see the logic? You see the mechanism, the principle of the mechanism. Tshuva is the same thing. If you do tshuva, what are you really doing? You are retracting your testimony, because that's what a mitzvah does, and you are saying, I'm sorry, I regret. Why? Because I did the wrong thing. I did the wrong act, the wrong will, and I am not Yeshod Mevadoy. Therefore, tshuva is an act of edus or charata, of saying yeshad mavadai. It is an act where you say, or I should say, instead of saying yeshad mavadai, you say einad mavadai. Therefore, tshuva also is an edus or a statement of einad mavadai. What about yisurin? Yisurin is also a statement of einad mavadai. How? It's interesting. When a person feels like he's somebody, there's two things going on. Who is the greatest competitor to God? And the answer is, we. It's either him or us. That's basically what it boils down to. It's either his will or our will. Therefore, Yisurin, when you suffer, if you're somebody that you think is so great, why can't you stop the suffering? Elamai, we see that when a person suffers, he becomes humble. Because he realizes, I'm nobody. I can't stop myself at all from suffering. So therefore what suffering does, it does half the job. It removes the illusion of yeshad mavadai, hopefully to be supplanted with einad mavadai. You see. So suffering in and of itself is also a tikkun device that chases away the reality of the Satan, which creates the reality of einad mavadai, or yeshad mavadai. We see that. So therefore we see all three are involved with creating the concept of einad mavadai. I want to tell you something. There are four components to a mitzvah. Therefore, it's very difficult to judge the reward of a mitzvah, because there are really four components. What are they? There's the act itself. That is one component of the mitzvah. There's the mindset, the intention. What do you think about when you do the mitzvah? Are you being mechaven for the mitzvah itself? Are you thinking of something else? What exactly is happening there? Intent is a very important part of a mitzvah. That's a second variable in a mitzvah. Third idea, and we certainly can't see intent. Third idea, what is your sense of joy or simcha in doing the mitzvah? When you do a mitzvah, are you happy? Are you joyful that this mitzvah will grant you eternal life? Or it's a burden to you? You want to get rid of it. Let's shuck it as quick as possible, and so on. That concept of simcha or joy is a critical element in the reward of the mitzvah. In fact, they say that the Ari was zoicha. Why was he so zoicha to what he knew? And the answer is, they say, because the Ari had tremendous simcha every time he did a mitzvah. That's why. It was a simcha, and in fact it says a novi has to always be with simcha. Then he can connect with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Apparently simcha in a mitzvah is a very critical ingredient that you need, that the mitzvah itself elevates you much greater than just the act and the intent. That's three. But there's a fourth element, which is probably the greatest of all. What would that be? And that is the Gemara. Lefum tsaro agra. According to the effort is the reward, which is interesting. What does that mean? It's called Mesiras Nefesh. What did you give up to do this mitzvah? Some guy's worth $500 million. When he writes out a check for $1,000 to a stucker, that's nice relative to the guy who's getting it. But for him, he wouldn't even bend down to pick that $1,000 bill up from the street, because it's the waste of his time, you see. So, although it's a mitzvah, but there's no lefum tzara agra. What's the tzara here, you see? But what happens if a guy who's poor, and he writes out a $1,000 check? The tzara is much greater. Therefore, lefum tzara agra, Mesiras Nefesh, you see. What is Mesiras Nefesh? It's Amelus. That is what Mesiras Nefesh is the greatest of all. And because when you look at a guy doing a mitzvah, I don't know what he gave up. He himself doesn't even know what he gave up. That is the greatest element or contributor of the reward you get. The question is why? I mean, it sounds nice and lofty. Why? Why should Amelus Mesiras Nefesh be so great that the Gemara says that from Tzara Agra, according to the Tzar's the reward. You know what the answer is? The truth is you all know what the answer is, except you have to apply what I said 10 minutes ago to now. I said that there are 3 devices that do what? That do the tikkun. What's a tikkun? Moichin, consciousness, Einid Mavadoi. What are they? Mitzvahs, Tshuva, and Yisurin. Why? Because each one is embedded, the concept or the concept of Einid Mavadoi. That's why. So it's Midah Keneged Midah. To the extent that you declare Einid Mavadoi, to that extent, you get the Einid Mavadoi. That's Eilim Haba. What about Amelis? Okay, what is Amelis really? Or Mesiras Nefesh? Well, Mesiras Nefesh is a complete bittul of self-interest. That's what Mesiras Nefesh is. In other words, you are negating your interest in something. You are suspending it for the will of somebody else. In other words, look, we all have self-interest, right? We all want to do things. We're interested in things, right? What happens if somebody all of a sudden comes along and says, you know, you can't do this. All of a sudden he got a farmer, right? And he's got 400 acres. You can imagine how much produce this guy has, and he wants to bring it in, either sell it or eat it, whatever. And all of a sudden the kohen comes up to him and says, excuse me, you can't take this stuff. You can't do anything with this stuff. You need to give me my take, which is Truma, my Sarishan, my Sasheni, my Saroni. I hope it doesn't make him an ani, but you have to give all this stuff. And the guy's head spinning. And then if you do that, you need to take challah and all this, there's all kinds of restrictions. Now, what is the interest of this farmer? He doesn't want to do this. He wants to take all this stuff and use it for himself in whatever way he can, right? To conform to his own self-interest. That's what he wants to do. But he can't. So the farmer is unbelievably moise nefesh. He suspends his self-interest to do the will of God. Why? Because it is the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom that is Ika, because Einad Mavadoi, not my will. So I will suspend my will, which is my self-interest, and I won't do it. Therefore, Mesiras Nefesh, which is effort expended toward a mitzvah, which is always in opposition to what you want, is the greatest form of Einad Mavadoi. But it's interesting, we can't even measure it, because nobody really knows how much you gave up. But this is the concept of Amelis. Very important idea why Amelis is so great. Question is, now what? Okay, we now have enough of understanding to understand the mechanics of the Bria, what it's really all about, in a very simple, summarized, succinct way. Let's now apply it, and you will see how it applies, and in the end, what the tafkid of Klal Yisrael really is. Remember what I said, that after the Chet of Odom, the tafkid of Klal Yisrael is to destroy the Satan, or to destroy his Zoyamah, to remove his Zoyamah, his influence, his pollution, his defilement of the Bria. Because that is always creating in us the concept of Yeshid Mavadoi, constantly. We never get away from that illusion. That's what we have to do. And once we do that, then we can have Zikuch, and after we do that, we can have Moichin, consciousness. This is really what it's all about, which as I had said before. Let's take a look. Zero. Thanks. Yitzchok. Let's visit Yitzchok Avinu. Thank you. Actually, it's going to go down all the way to the bottom, so just a little bit down. Esav comes over to Yitzchak, and he says the following. He says, where's my bracha? So Yitzchak says to him, who are you? Thanks. So Esav says, who I am? Who am I? I'm your Bechor. Right? So Yitzchak is shocked, because he realizes instantly what happened, that Yaakov took the brachas. That's a great deal to speak about that. Let's dwell on this. So Esav starts crying. The Zohar says that he shed 3 tears. Those 3 tears is what destroyed us. The whole golus is because of those 3 tears. Without getting into that, so Esav says, don't you have anything left for me? Yitzchak must have felt terrible. Even though he realized at that point in time that Yaakov deserved it because if the Moshe did not warn him, clearly it was not meant for Esav, it had meant for Yaakov. However, a father's a father, and he felt terrible. So he said, I will give you a bracha. It was an Ilui Shechab. I don't know if it's right to say that about Yitzchak, but it was a great chab. But here's what he said. He said, when Yaakov does the mitzvahs, nothing I can do for you. But when Yaakov sins, you will persecute him. You will become great. You will be the one who gets those type of brachas. Now, what kind of a bracha is that? Why would he do that? Why would Yitzchak do this to Yaakov by making Esav the persecutor of Yaakov when he sins, or his descendants? The answer to that is a very important idea. What Yitzchak realized is that the way to destroy the Zoyama, how do you destroy the Zoyama? One of the greatest ways is, what does the Satan do? The Satan not only pervades the world, the physical universe, but there are many agents to the Satan, specifically the Umas Ha'olam. There are many nations in the world that are evil, that have done terrible things in human history. When you read the history of man, it's really a history of the butchery of man. The amount of wars that men have done to man for no reason. It's astounding to watch. They don't care if they step on people, kill people. Just look at the world today. And the world today is nothing more than a repeat of what's been going on for thousands of years. So therefore, many of the Umas Ha'olam are really agents of the Satan. So the way you destroy the Satan, is one of the ways, is you go into a nation that is an agent of the Satan, and you do mitzvahs. You are oimei b'tzit kosoi. You do the mitzvahs in spite of the fact that you're in the middle of this ummah that's an agent of the Satan. You withstand their pressure. You do the mitzvahs, and as a result of that, you deplete the Zoyama, the koich of the Satan, by doing that. If you don't do that, so when that ummah will persecute you and make you suffer, that also depletes the Satan. Therefore, one of the important ways of doing this, of depleting the koich of the Satan, is by going into his agents and remaining steadfast in doing mitzvahs. And ultimately, if that doesn't work totally, then of course they will persecute you, and that also will bring you Yitzurin, and that also will deplete the Satan. In any case, this is the fundamental way to do that idea. However, what is interesting is that the nation that the Jews go into cannot be a mere nation. They have to become a superpower. They have to be what's called the Bechor of the Satan. They can't be any nation. They have to be a nation that is literally a firstborn of the Satan. This is what they have to be. The major agent of the Satan. Therefore, they will become what's called a superpower. Okay? Because that's the Bechor of the Satan. Is a superpower. And when you're in that, you can draw out the greatest amount of what's called Zoyama by doing that itself. In any case, so therefore here's what Yitzchak told Esav. It's true, I cannot give you the brachas anymore. Why? Because I gave it to Yaakov. But you want the brachas of tremendous gashmias? I'll give it to you. You will become the greatest agent of the Satan the world has ever seen. And automatically then, you'll become the Bechor of the Satan. And automatically then, you'll become a superpower. Voila, as they say in French, I think. You will have all the brachas of materialism that I promised Yaakov. Not totally, but wow. So Esav was, of course, only too glad to oblige, because it also meant he can get revenge on Yaakov. But what Yitzchak did, of course he didn't make Esav, as somebody to persecute Yaakov, but he knew Yaakov would sin, and that his descendants would sin. So what he simply did is he assigned him to be the greatest prosecutorial prosecution agent of the Satan. And in that way, he would realize all the blessings. Okay? And by the way, there are 8 nations that persecute the Jews. They are the 8 nations that are assigned the task of being the Bechor of the Satan, in a certain sense, and therefore they are always superpower, in the sense that they always rule, and it's just fabulous for these guys. Who are they? It's interesting to know. The first one we'll talk about a little is Egypt, Mitzrayim. The second one is Bavel, Babylon. The third one is Persia. The fourth one is Greece. Am I counting right?
That's right.
Second, 3. First is Mitzrayim, second is Bavel, third is Persia, fourth is Greece. Yeah. Fifth is Rome. The sixth is Ishmael, the Arabs, Islam. The seventh is Amalek. And the eighth is the Erev Rav, Jews. These are the 8 nations that are assigned to persecute the Jews, or really that the Jews have to be moser nefesh to remain righteous amongst these nations, and therefore deplete the koyach of these nations, and they will then collapse. And as a result of all that, the Satan, who is the chief generator of all this, he will collapse. And that's the process where he dies. That's what Yitzchak did. So we understand something very important, that the way to remove the koyach of the Satan is if you are his agent and you remain righteous, or if you suffer at their hands, you deplete the koyach of the Satan. Where did that happen? Mitzrayim. What was Egypt? Egypt was an interesting place. Egypt at that time was the Bechor of the Satan. It was the firstborn of the Satan. As such, they were what's called a persecutory agent. And what did Klal Yisrael do? Well, believe it or not, they did the job. What did they do? In the beginning it says what? When the Ramchal talked about Avraham Avinu, he said, Ger Yizaracho, your nation shall be Gerim. What does that mean? That means that they will not assimilate. They will remain frum. That's what a ger is. In other words, even though you're amongst the Egyptians, but they will remain gerim, sojourners, and they will remain frum, and that way they will deplete Egypt. If that doesn't work, what does it say? Va'avodim. They will serve them. Oh, there's the beginning of Yisurim. And if that doesn't work, it says V'inoisam. That's real heavy-duty Yisurim. But in the end of time, in the end of all of it, they deplete the koyach of the Satan, or rather they deplete the koyach of Egypt, which then depletes the koyach of the Satan, and guess what? Egypt collapses. And ultimately speaking, that's really what happened. They depleted the Satan. In fact, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu said to Paroi. You have no koyach left with all your magic, because even magic gets its koyach from the Satan, but the Satan has no koyach anymore, and therefore we will destroy the Satan. We will destroy Satan, we will destroy Egypt. So what happened as a result of that is that they actually destroyed, in many ways, the Satan. But what really happened, Api Hashkofa, is that they took the Zerma and they extracted it from the human form. The Gemara in Shabbos alludes to that when the Gemara says, Nifsika Zerma Shel Nochosh. That the Zerma of the Nochosh, it's a Gemara, it's not even a Zohar. That the Zerma of the Satan was Nifsika, ceased. And as a result of that, he was externalized from the human form. How? Again, because they remained righteous in Egypt. Therefore, the Sultan was externalized, and he almost died, the Sultan, but the Sultan was desperate to get into back. What does Sultan do? He created an image in the sky of Moshe Rabbeinu. He fooled the Jews, and the Jews figured Moshe Rabbeinu was dead. They need a new intermediary, and what they did is they made the Egel, which is terrible. Why? What was the consequences of the Egel? Very interesting. Until now, the Bria is in the hands of the Sultan. Right? The Bria, creation is in the hands of the Sultan, and that's why there's tumah, that's why there's death, that's why there's a lot of different ideas. That's why we have the whole Seder Taras. But with the creation of the Egel, something else happened, which was terrible. What was that? What is very important to understand is the whole tafkid of the Jews was to do what? Remember, was to raise consciousness, moichen, to give consciousness of the true hasaga of the bria, of reality, which is Eloi Mavadoi. That hasaga is really what? That hasaga is the Or Mashiach. That's really what it is. It is the Messianic light. That's what he had to bring down. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when everybody's collecting gold and so on, he goes to the Yam Suf, and all of a sudden he raises the coffin of Yosef. It says, Vayikach Moshe's Atzmos Yosef. Why was Yosef so busy doing this? Okay, it's also because Yosef made Klal Yisrael swear that they would take him out. That's true. But there's a great pnimius. It's not that Vayikach Yosef is Atzmos Yosef. He took out the bones of Yosef. But Vayikach Yosef is Atzmus Yosef, the essence of Yosef, the essence of Mashiach ben Yosef. What is that? That's the Or of Mashiach. That's Mochen. That's consciousness. Why was he able to do that? Because for the first time in history, that Or came down, and Moshe Rabbeinu was able to take it out of Egypt, which is astounding. And that is the Gilui of Matan Torah. Matan Torah is really the whole concept of the Or Mashiach. And that is why we read Yecheskel, of the whole Ma'aseh Merkava, the divine chariot, on Shavuos. Because that's really the Or that came down out of Mitzrayim into Klal Yisrael by Matan Torah. So therefore, Klal Yisrael was Zocha to the Or Mashiach because they had taken it out. Because once you took the Zoyana out of the Bria, what's left? Then the whole concept of the Gilui, of the Rebbeinu Shalom, of the Shekhinah, becomes available. So therefore, you now have the Or Rishon, which is incredible. And the Or Rishon is what? The Or Rishon is the Luchas Rishonis. That's really what it is. And the Chazal and Merames, where you could read the Luchas Rishonis, you could read them on both sides. You can read both sides from only one. Why? Because you could see right through. What is the Or Rishon? The Or Rishon isn't another reality. It's a gilui of the total reality. Which means that you could see any phenomenon and see immediately all the way down to its Kabbalistic causes. What causes this reality? It is what's called a view of total reality. That's really what the Or Mashiach is. And that was the Luchas Rishonis. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the Mashiach ben Yosef. That's really who he was. And he almost accomplished it, if not for the Chet. In any case, so what did the Chet do? What the Chet did was terrible. You should know, at Matan Torah, the Yidden had done two things. One is that they had brought the Hasaga, which is Mochen, out of the Klippa, out of the Tumah. And the second thing they did, when they died, they had no more death, Zoyama, in them, and they were no more subject to death. That was Tchias HaMesim. That's why the Baruch Shem had them die. He knew that if he would say the first two commandments, they would die. Why did he do it? And the answer is, because he wanted them to die, to get rid of their guf. The Zoyama would leave, and they would be Zoyach. That was their Tchias HaMesim. So the incredible thing is that they were at the threshold of removing two things. The Zoyama from the Bria, right? And the Hasaga of the Or itself. Wow, what an accomplishment. What they do? They did the Chet Egel. What is the Chet Egel really? Why an Egel? And the answer is, what they did is they undid what they did in Mitzrayim. All of a sudden, the Zoyama re-entered the Bria, subjecting Klal Yisrael to Zoyama in their guf, which means again they would die. That's the first thing. And the second thing is something that was incredible. They took the Torah itself and they made it subject to the Zoyama. Klippa. Torah now became a Klippa. Or rather, Torah became surrounded by a Klippa. You see? So the Zoyama not only re-entered the creation because of the ego, but it also was surrounded now by the Zoyama itself. What does all that mean? What is the consequence of this? What is the Or Rishon? I had mentioned. The Or Rishon is what? Is really the whole concept of Hasog ve'enei yichuda, enei movadoi, Hasog is yichudai, and so on, which is what they were zocher to. They surrounded it with a klippa. In any case, why a calf? Because a calf, if you think about it, a shor, is the symbol of Yosef. They had taken out the symbol of Yosef from Egypt, the shor, Atzmus Yosef. And now what they did is they now surrounded Yosef's chokhmah, Mashiach ben Yosef, right, which is the egel or the calf or the ox and so on, with the klippa. So therefore, the symbol of the object itself, that now represented an intermediate form of the Rebbe Shalom, was an ox, because that indicated that the Sultan now had the Torah in his klippas, in his hands. That's what it means. Therefore, the ego is Yosef in the klippa, or rather, it's a Mashiach ben Yosef in the klippa, or it's Hasagas Yehuda in the klippa. That's what happened. Terrible. It's absolutely a terrible state of the Torah. So not only does Klal Yisrael have to do what? Not only does Klal Yisrael have to do what? Take the Zoyama out of the Bria, they now have to take it out of the Torah. Two jobs. Because now there are two things that are pervaded by the Zoyama. One is the Bria itself, and two is the Meichen. The Hasoga is also surrounded by Klippa. Now you're going to ask me, what is the manifestation of that? What does it mean Torah is in the Klippa, or Torah is surrounded by Tumah? What does that mean? What it means is the following. The Ari says, when you learn Torah, if you have a kasha, that's a Klippa. What a Klippa does is it makes your ability to access Torah extremely difficult. You can have all kinds of kashas, contradictions. You don't know what's flying. You don't know what's going on. Why? Because there is a klippa that surrounds the Torah. That's what the Ari says. Interesting. Now you know why you have so many kashas. You see, it's not your fault. It's klippa. How does it manifest itself in the text itself? Very interesting. You know how it manifests? One, the Torah all of a sudden, instead of becoming this unbelievable structure, Tiferes, beauty of all Chochmas HaTorah in a beautiful form, it becomes fragmented. One, it's no longer a structure, it's in a fragment. Two, that this fragment itself is in one place of Gemara, Shas, and it's another place. That's a klippa. You don't write a book like this. That's a klippa manifestation. Why would information be in one end of Shas, and the other part of information, what you need to know, is in the other end of Shas? Is this the way to learn? No. But it's a klippa. Not only that, even in one place in Shas, it's unsequenced. There's no correct order. What's difficult comes first, and what's easy comes second. Just take a look at some of the Gemaras, right? How maybe get Mendel is first, and nobody has any idea what in the world a get is. Yet we're learning about what? Problems if a get comes from Medina Siyam. So we have problems of authenticity, which is Rava, and we have problems what's written in Shmo, which is Rabba. Excuse me, you're talking about a shliach that brings a get? I don't even know what a get is. I don't know how to write a get. I don't know the halachas of get. You're worried about if a get comes from Medina Siyam? That's a klippa. That's what it means to learn something. Some of the Masechtas start with the advanced part first, and the fundamental part later. I mean zvachim. Any zevach which is shalei lishmo, and so on. What do you mean? What's a zevach? What's lishmo? What is lishmo? And then I'll worry about what shalei lishmo is. No. So the first Mishnah is shalei lishmo. Mishnah is replete. So therefore the klipa is one fragmentation. One place has loaded and the other place is sparse. That's a klipa. Even in the place where it's rich, it's unsequenced. And there's no plinius. You see, this is all klipa, really. That's the influence. In other words, the klipa surrounds the text itself. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to learn. How do you break this? What do? And now we begin to understand what Rashi means in the beginning of Choisai. The way to break the klipa, what is the Torah? The Torah message is what? Eined Mavadoi. Yes? The klipa, the Zohar, the Sultan's message is Yeshad Mavadoi. You want to break Yeshad Mavadoi, guess what? You need to demonstrate Eined Mavadoi. Do you remember I said what Mesiras Nefesh is? Amelus? What is Mesiras Nefesh? It's the greatest statement of Eined Mavadei, because not only do you believe in Eined Mavadei, you're actually expending enormous effort to be made to testify Eined Mavadei. That breaks the klipa, mida keneged mida. See the beauty of the equation? The Torah is Eined Mavadei. The klipa is Yeshad Mavadei, because that's what it's always trying to convince you. And the way to break the klipa is Eined Mavadei to Amelus. Therefore, the secret of learning is Amelus. It's more important to be Omel than it is to know. Now you're going to say, what? How's that possible? Because the truth is, do you know that the old Rishon, you don't have to be Omel? Why? Think about this. It says, Kodesh B'richu, Torah, Klal Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Chadhu. Why would I have to be Omel if it's me? Of course not. But if a klipa is surrounding it, then it separates self. It's like a multiple personality. You see. Therefore, in order to break the klipa, you have to be Omel. But the interesting thing about it is that really you don't have to be Omel. The Orishon is instant information, like Nevuah. There's no Amelus by Nevuah, except to become a Navi. But the act of Nevuah is not Amelus. There's no Amelus in the Orishon. But if there's a klipa, there is Amelus, because you need to demonstrate Eined Mavadei by Mesiras Nefesh. That's the way you have to do it. So really, you should know the Torah intuitively, instantly. The reason why we don't is because of the klipa, the Zohar. Therefore, Amelus is more critical than knowing, because Amelus will lead to knowing, but really you wouldn't have needed it without the Chet Ego. You see the way it works. We now understand something very fundamental. That's why Chazal say, Lefum Tsar or Agro, according to the Tsar, Amelus, Mesiras Nefesh, Eined Mavadei testimony, is the Agro Eined Mavadei. Yogato Matzoso. Why? Because Amelus Eined Mavadei, right? And not only that, but the also Hem Amelim Anak Amelim. That's what it means. We are Makabel Schaf Amelus. Why? Because that's how we get to know our Torah. It's for Amelus. Without the Amelus, you don't get to know it. Guess what? Without Amelus, you don't really know it, because you have not broken the klipa. What is interesting is that if somebody breaks a klipa in New York, then somebody in California will instantly figure it out. Because Yisrael HaRebbe is there. It's Chad Gufa. So it's interesting that if somebody in New York breaks a klipa, then some guy in California will know it automatically, just flies right into his head. Why? Because the klipa was already broken by somebody in New York. Which is interesting. In any case, what I'm telling you is fundamental. It's what really goes on. But in many ways, it's a mighty chiddush. We see now what the tremendous necessity of Amelus is. In any case, Therefore, we now understand that there are two avodas in Klal Yisrael. The first avodah is amelis in Torah, to break the klipa of Torah, which is really to break the klipa that surrounds murchen, consciousness, which is what it's all about. That's why amelis is so important. The second avodah of Klal Yisrael, besides the liman Torah and the amelis of Torah, is to break the zerma of the entire bria, and that is by being an agent of the Satan, being omed b'tzikosai, and destroying the klipa. That is why when every time Jews go into an ummah, and when they leave, it collapses. Egypt collapsed. Babylon collapsed. Greece collapses. Rome collapsed. What saved Rome is that the klipa of Rome was transformed. The agent of the Satan, known as Rome, was transformed into Christianity. And Christianity was transformed into Western civilization. Therefore, we now are the agent of the Satan in that sense. Christianity that has butchered hundreds of millions of Jews over the years. We are now in that klipa. We are trying desperately to be oimed in our tzidkas. You know what's interesting? I once mentioned it. What's interesting is that where is the seat of Christianity? Of course, it's in Rome, the Vatican, because they took over Rome as the chief agent. That's why they are in Rome. Really, where should they be? In Israel, Judea, where their guy lived. What's it doing in Rome? Rome was the enemy of that guy. And the answer is because they took over the klipa of Rome, so therefore they're in Rome. And where are they? In the Vatican. If you take a look at the word Vatican, Vatican, you take the vav and move it a little further down, it becomes tikkun. The major shlichus, agent of the Vatican, is tikkun for the Jews. It's mamash what Esav does. In any case, this is the idea so far. What's happening now? And we see what's happening now. You should know one thing, although it's hard to believe, and that's another shir. The Satan is dying. We don't realize that, but he's dying. And therefore what he's trying to do is survive desperately. And we see the collapse of many things. And I will give you examples. One, we see the collapse of many areas. USA is collapsing in many ways, not totally. I know Obama's killing the United States. Europe, bad recession. The whole West is in a bad recession. The Arabs are collapsing. Every state you look at is collapsing. And Yishmael is really the last klipa, and they are collapsing. Not only that, but the Goyim can no longer hold the Jews. That's why so many Jews have left, Syria and Iraq and so on. Means they don't have the ability to hold the Jews anymore and to make them suffer. Why? Because their job is ending. It's funny, what killed the nations of the world? What killed the nations of the world from persecuting the Jews? And the answer is democracy. The way a nation subjugates the Jews and destroys them is by dictatorships or monarchies. What happened is, if you have a democracy, it's much harder to persecute the Jews, because then everybody has to be part of it. And usually most people are not anti-Semitic, although it's turning out something like that, but usually not. So therefore, democracy isn't to give people the rule, it's to stop Esav. It's to stop the persecution of the Jews. It's to stop the agents of the Satan from doing what? From putting the Jews under that matzav. Why? Because the rise of democracy is the beginning of the end of the Satan. It's a weird thought, I realize that. That democracy is the vehicle or the tool that is stopping the Goyim from killing the Jews. Much less Jews have died at the hands of democracy. And if you're going to talk about Germany, Germany wasn't a democracy, even though they voted for Hitler. He was an absolute dictator and totalitarian and so on. Tyrant. In any case, so we see therefore that the Satan is dying, and therefore a lot of things are collapsing. The Ummah Ha'olam are collapsing. Their ability to hold the Jews within them and to persecute the Jews is collapsing. And not only that, but the Arabs are collapsing. And Reb Chaim Vital says that the Arabs, the Yishmael, is the last Klippa, without getting into that. So therefore, we are rapidly approaching the end. That's number one. Number two, what about the Torah? And I'm going to say things which sound weird, and it really sounds funny. But within the context of the Shir, that's what it is. What does it mean? You remember I said what it means, Torah in the Klippa? What's the manifestation of the Klippa? Fragmentation, it's piled up in one place and sparse in another. It's all unsequenced. There's no pneumius and so on. This is ending. How? Until now, Mishnayos is a text that's fragmented. Mishnayos was written by Rebbe in the form of a Klippa, and so is Gemara, and so on. And that's why there's so much machlekes in Klal Yisrael, because the Klippa, it creates the machlekes. It gives uncertainty, and then all of a sudden everybody's arguing. It's all Klippa in the end. It's a satanic influence on the Torah itself. But what's happening today? All of a sudden there's a tremendous revolution to clarify the Mishnayos, the Gemara. A classic example, Art Scroll. You think it was an accident that a guy can write Art Scroll and it'd be so accepted? Of course not. You don't have a rishus to change the Torah if there's a klip around it. And the answer has to be because the klip is dying. And all of a sudden rishus is given to Klal Yisrael, where the hasaga of Torah is now understood without fragmentation. If you take a look at the Mishnayos, is now rewritten in many, many ways. The Gemara is rewritten in many, many ways. You have Mesifta, which brings out all the legwork. Boy, I wish they had Mesifta 40 years ago, and so on, It's a whole different Gemara, and so on. It's true that there's less Amelis. That's true. But there's much more Hasaga, and so on. And this is the concept then. The Torah is coming out of the Klippa. That's what's happening. Don't be blind. This isn't a phenomenon that, by the way, just happens to happen. It's because Rishus is given to people who are zocher for it, to bring the Torah out of the Klippa, which means to remove the fragmentation, the sequence problem, the fact that it's disorganized, and so on. And it's not even in language Aramaic, it's written in English, and so on. All of this is because Torah is slowly rising out of the Klippa. But there's a big problem, and the answer is shocking. What's the problem? The problem is that before the Mashiach comes, there has to be tremendous darkness. Like it says, the Baal Turim says that, it says, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And it was choshech, right? So the Baal Turim says, Zuhi ruche shel melech HaMashiach. The gematria of Ruach Elokim Rachefes is Zuhi ruche shel melech HaMashiach. What does that mean? That means before the Mashiach comes, there has to be tremendous choshech. Darkness. Darkness of what? You know what it is. Yeshad Mevadoi. Because the sun is dying. And therefore he's going to try, is like a star that's about to blow up, to invest mankind with as great Yeshad Mevadoi as he can. Because he's dying. You see. And therefore, that's the darkness of Yeshad Mevadoi. So the problem is this. If that's the case, if there's such incredible Amaratzis, Choshech, which means Amaratzis, even in Klal Yisrael, where's the Amelis? Nobody knows anything. You need an Amelis to break the rest of the Klippa. Well, there is no other formula. So if that's the case, where's the Amelis to break the Klippa of the Torah at the end of time? Where is it? And you know what the answer is? You all know. But you don't think of it in those terms. The answer is Daf Yomi. Let me say that again. It's Daf Yomi. What is Daf Yomi? You think that Chazal never thought about this idea of learning a blot a day? Of course they did. But that's not what learning is all about. You don't know anything in Daf Yomi. It's like taking a train through France at 400 miles an hour. And then somebody asks you, do you remember what the landscape looked like? You say, what are you talking about? I just went 400 miles an hour. That's what Daf Yomi is. Daf Yomi has nothing to do with education. In fact, the only way a guy can say, I forgot the whole Shas is by Daf Yomi. So then what's the point? No. It has an incredible tachlis. And the answer is, Amelis. Are you notice for a guy to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go through Shas? Or a guy has to miss all the chasnas and simchas because he's got to make his Daf Yomi shir at night? It is the amelis of Amoratzim, or guys who are not professional B'nai Torah, or whatever, guys who cannot spend all day learning Torah. That amelis substitutes for the amelis of learning the Torah and knowing it. There you are. So Daf Yomi is a proof that the Mashiach is near, because it actually brought the amelis back to Klal Yisrael, not necessarily to B'nai Torah. And you might pick up an article and learn Daf Yomi. And the amelis that stick to the blot, 2,711 pages for 7.5 years. What an amelis. That's what's happening so far. Interesting. But it all makes sense once you understand the whole concept of what is happening. Now, therefore, I want to end off. I think this is really what the Por Aduma is all about. Por Aduma is an incredible mitzvah. I mean, there's so much said about the Por Aduma. I want to show you an interpretation of the Por Aduma, which is very interesting. Now, I know you're going to say the Por Aduma, even Shlomo Melech never understood the Por Aduma. But did he? I think he did. In fact, Ibn Ezra says he worked on it. It says, I thought that I would be wise, but he would choik mimenu, and it was far from me. So Chazal learned the Por Aduma escaped him, which is interesting that the Ibn Ezra says that, no, he said it's far from me, but I persisted and I understood it. Whatever. But there's something else. What about the other chukim of the Torah? Do you realize Shlomo Melech knew all the chukim? Chazal say the man was awesome. The man knew more than anybody who ever lived. In fact, Gemara Mendel says that he knew, there are things he knew that even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. This was Shlomo HaMelech. Listen, when the Baruch Hashem says, I'm giving you a gift, you better believe it. It's going to be a gift. And the gift was awesome. The man knew everything. I'm not even talking about the language of the trees and the birds and everything else. That's nothing. But he knew it just beyond belief. So we say, that means he knew all the chukim. It's clear like that. The Medrash says that. The only chok he didn't really know, at least from the Pasuk it says, was the Por Aduma. The truth is, I believe, he did know the Por Aduma. So what does chok mean? Okay, all that aside, let me go into what I think the Por Aduma is. You understand something very important. You understand the two fundamental attacks of Klal Yisrael is one, to destroy the Satan, which means to remove the klippa around the Torah, and to remove the klippa or the zerma of the entire Bria. Once you do that, then you have zikuch of Geshem, you retransform the physical universe into spiritual, and then you have Meichen consciousness of the Hasog Ve'enei Mavadoy. And this ultimately is the Or Mashiach, and certainly the Or of Olam Haba, whatever. Therefore, what the Por Aduma is very interesting. Let's take a look at some of the halachas of the Por Aduma. One, it's a cow. It's all red. It's a female. It has to be burnt. You have to take ashes. You have to mix it with spring water. Then you have to sprinkle it on the third day and on the seventh day. But only on somebody's Atmei Mace. Somebody who touched the dead body. Okay. The most incredible thing about the Por Aduma, which nobody understands, is how in the world could something which is a process of Tahara be Tameh? Because anybody who's osik in the Por Aduma is Tameh. We know that. Right? Whether you burn it, the ones who bring it, carry the ashes, you name it. You're involved, you're Tameh. By the way, it's the same idea with the Siyah Mishtalech by Yom Kippur. The oisik in it was Tameh, even though it was a Kapora instrument. But the Por Aduma, anybody who touches it in any way is Tameh. Yet when you sprinkle on somebody, you're Tomo, which is astounding. How is that possible? So in fact, Rashi even brings out that the Umas Ha'olam said, what kind of a mitzvah is this? It's completely contradictory. How is that possible? How do we understand the Por Aduma? Let me tell you what I think is an interpretation of the Por Aduma. You now know something very, very important. First idea, what the tachlis of the Bria is. to remove the Zoyama from the Bria, and also from the Torah itself. That's the way you can destroy the Satan. And then once you do that, then you can do Zikuch, and you can do Sog and so on. What the Pura Duma really is represents two things. The Pura represents Torah. It's the Egel. And Chazal actually say that openly. They say that openly. And even Rashi says that in the Chukas by Rav Moshe Darshan and so on. It represents the Egel, and the Mendel says that. There's no question about that. And not only that, but it has to be all red. So that's why it's an ox. Because it represents the Egel. It represents Torah in the Klippa. Because that's what the Egel is. It's Torah in the Klippa. The redness of it, however, represents what? We know. The Satan. The concept of Odom, red, is a satanic concept. Where do you see this? Esav. He was red. Who was the Malach of Esav? The Satan. And it was his job to destroy the Satan without getting into the whole parsha of Esav. And therefore, he was born red. Reddy complexion, whatever, red complexion and so on. So therefore, the red itself represents the Satan and his Zerma. Okay? And his entire influence on the Bria. So you have two things represented by the Paraduma. One is the par itself represents the Torah and the Klippa, and the redness of that par represents the second aspect of Klippa, which is a Satan and a Zerma itself. Okay? Therefore, that's why it has to be all red. It has to be all red, to me more, because it represents the Satan. Two black hairs, two white hairs, whatever, puzzles it. Because that's not the Satan. The Satan is a totality of evil, or red. That's number two. It's a female. Why? Because the Torah is a kala. Remember Klal Yisrael, with the Torah, which is a kala, came up to Baruch and said, what about me? So Baruch said, I give you the Chosin, Yisrael. We are the Chosin. The Torah is the kala. She's a female. Therefore the Porah has to be a female. Okay? The next idea. It has to be at least two. It's a machlokes in Mishnah. It has to be two or three. In other words, what does that mean? It has to be mature, not an ego. Why? Because the Satan's klippa is on everything. Mature, not immature, halfway. What does that mean? It's on Nigla and Nista. It's on the Orishan, and it's also on the Torah itself. Where do you see that? Because the Gemara says, Shivrei Luchos, where are they? They're Menachem Ba'oren. Do you ever think about that? Fine. The Shivrei Luchos are in the Oren. What does that mean? There's a modig remes here. I want to tell you something. Moshe Rabbeinu had an unbelievable problem. You know what the problem was? The problem was this. Where the Baruch said to him, excuse me, Lech Reid, go down. You were supposed to be Mashiach ben Yosef. It's over with because of the Chet Ego. So the question is, so Moshe Rabbeinu, he's got these two luchos in his hand. He goes down, right? He takes a look at Klal Yisrael. He sees the Chet Ego, takes the tablets, the luchos, he throws it down and it shatters at the base of the mountain. The question is, that's astounding. How does he have a right to do that? You know, if I give you a gift to bring somebody, right? Let's say it's diamond earrings or whatever, jewelry. And I said, do me a favor, bring it to Yankel. He lives so-and-so, right? You go to Yankel, knock on the door, and somebody answers the door and said, you know, Yankel's not here. He went overseas for a couple of months. So what are you going to do? You got this beautiful jewelry in your hand. You can't give it to Yankel because he's gone. So you know what you do with it? You see a garbage pail, you throw it in the garbage. Does that make sense? How can Moshe Rabbeinu do that? He's got the luchos, the greatest thing known to man. So Roshim says, hey, they can't have it, so therefore you can't deliver it. So what is Moshe Rabbeinu supposed to do? He should have gone over to Roshim and said, take it back. Here it is. Right? That's what anybody would do. He didn't do that. He took it and he busted it. He broke it. Why? How did Moshe Rabbeinu do that? Because he had an incredible problem. He said like this to himself, and you begin to realize what a leader has to do. He said, you know, I have one of two choices. I can give it back to Bershom, but guess what? The Bershom doesn't want it. How do I know? And because I was holding the luchas when he told me lech raid, he should have said to me, give it to me back. He didn't, which means he didn't want it. That's what it means. He should have said, okay, let me have it back, because I'm standing with the luchas in front of him. I didn't go down yet. Elamai, he doesn't want it back. He wants me to figure out what to do. Bad news. Why? Because I don't know what to do. If I give it back to the Rebbe Shalom, even though he didn't ask me, that means the Yidden will never have any hasaga of the Orishan until Mashiach comes. That's terrible. And if I give it to the Jews, they're not roy because of the Chet Ego. It'll kill them. Because if you're not roy for a certain Kedusha, it can destroy you. So I don't know what to do. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, aha, I figured it out. If I give it back to the Rebbe Shalom, so even though the Chet Ego created the fact that the Klippa surrounded the Torah, but if I give it back to God, it won't surround the Orishim, because I give it back to the Rebbe Shalom. You know what I'll do? I'll give it to Jews, and the Klippa will surround it, but once the Orishim is surrounded, I have to shatter it. So therefore, Shivrei Luchas. What is the Klippa manifestation? You remember? It's fragmented, which is exactly what it was in the Oren, right? It's Anim Mokerechod, means half the Luchas were on one side of the yard and the other half. It's completely disassembled. Not only that, right? Not only it's fragmented and completely dispersed, you couldn't read it at all. It was unsequenced. In fact, the Orishan, which is the Luchas, is the exact situation as a Klippa on top of the Orishan. It's amazing. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'd rather give it to Klal Yisrael in a Klippa because at least they'll have the ha'orah of the Orishan. They'll have some shaykhs because it's with us. It's in our own, and even though we can't read it because the Klippa surrounds it terribly, but at least we have a kesher. What's the kesher that we have to the Orishan? Kabbalah. That's why we have Kabbalah. Because that's a kesher to the Orishan because it's with us. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu had to figure out, which is, when you think about it, absolutely amazing. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu did. Therefore, we have a Torah that is surrounded by klippas. So therefore, the Torah, okay, represents the ego, which is the Torah that surrounds what? It surrounds not just the Torah Nigla, but Nista, and therefore the Torah has to be mature, which is the totality of Torah. Not only that, what do we do to this? We burn it. Because that's what we have to do. We have to destroy and burn the Zoyim of the Satan. We have to destroy him. And we need to destroy the Klip around the Torah. That's what we need to do. Which is amazing. That's why we need to burn it. But wait a minute. This isn't the Korban. It's called a Chatas. The reason why it's called a Chatas, not because it's a Korban Chatas, because it also, Chatas means purification. Because it is an instrument of purification, which it really is. You see. Not only that, but the Kohen puts his hand, the blood, from his left hand, whatever, right, sprinkles it toward it was on the Har Zaysim, that's where they did it, they burnt it, and he sprinkles it toward the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or the temple area, the Beis HaMikdash, and so on. Why? Because the whole Paraduma is the instrument of Tumah. It's all based on a pasuk in Iyov. U'miyitein Torah mitomei. Iyov says, who is the only one that can bring Tahara from Tumah itself? Who is the only one that can actually use Tumah as an instrument of the Gula? That's why the Satan is called a Ksil, Uksil Yayon, because the Dvoshim is murdered. He said to the Satan, I'm not going to create another force that's going to fight you. You yourself will bring the Gula. That's how obginat you're going to be. You see, so the Satan doesn't even suspect that he's bringing the Gula, because he is the very instrument of redemption, of Geula. So the Paraduma really represents the Zerma, that's red, and it represents the Torah in the Klippa. So it's the Zerma of the entire Bria and the Umas Ha'olam, and it represents the Torah. And therefore, all of it has to be burnt, the Zerma, aside from the Torah, okay, and aside from the Umas Ha'olam and the Bria. It has to be burnt, and it has to be converted into ashes. What's an ash? An ash is a transformation of the original material. once the Zoyama is destroyed, then Zikuch can take place. But if Zikuch takes place, right, and that's the ashes represent that, wait a minute, what does the Zikuch? And the answer is the Neshama, and that's the Mayim Chayim. The Neshama mixes together with the ashes, which is Geshem without Zoyama, and that is a Tahara instrument. And that is sprinkled. So it's a Moedik Zach. The Pora Aduma itself represents Tumah as an instrument. And it actually affects Tahara. But it has to be burnt. What's the burning process ultimately? It's Amelus and Mesias Nefesh. That's what the process is. And therefore, ultimately speaking, it can actually create a Tahara itself. That's the mystery of the Pora Aduma. And that's Tahara from Tumah. That Tumah itself is an instrument, you see. And that is why it solves the greatest mystery of all. Why is it anybody who's metapel with the Pora Aduma is Tameh? And the answer is because the Pora Aduma is the instrument of Tumah. And if you metapel with it, even though ultimately it would lead to Tahara, but the instrument itself is Tameh. Zoyama. And therefore you become Tameh. But when the instrument is burnt into ashes, it is then Tahara. And then the Neshama mixes with the Geshem, which has no Zoyama, then it becomes immediately an instrument of Tahara, you see. That's the tremendous paradox. Because really the instrument is Tumah. It's not Kedusha. It mirrors the image of the Zoyama around the Torah and around the entire Bria. And that's Tameh. Anybody's metapel with that becomes Tameh. And that's the same thing with the Siyam Shtalech. The Siyam Shtalech, right, is Tumah. It represents what? The Satan. The Sheikh of the Satan. You are metapel with it, you become Tameh. Of course, when you throw it off the mountain, then it's Mechapeh Klal Yisrael. Obviously. But anybody who touches an instrument of Tumah, even though it's the instrument of Tahara, will become Tameh. It's a beautiful answer for the paradox. Because the concept of me, Yitain Torah mi Tameh. That's why. Because the Pora Aduma in the end does represent the process of Tumah being the agent for the Tahara itself of Klal Yisrael. You see. And therefore, this is what Shlomo didn't understand. But what didn't he understand really? He really understood the Pora Aduma. But there was something else he didn't understand. What was that? Because you can bring the raya from the Pasuk. First of all, the only one he didn't understand was the Pora Aduma. But everything else he understood. Do you have any idea what kind of chokhmah it is to figure out every chok in the Torah that we do not know? It's unbelievable. So why didn't he understand the Pora Aduma? It's hard to understand. But I think what really it means is this. He knew what the Pora Aduma was. Come on. A man that brilliant, his intelligence is beyond the charts. Of course he knows what it is. He figured out every other chok. But he had a problem with the Pora Aduma. And you know what the Pasuk shows that? Because it says, Ech komo, I will become wise.